Hey kids, CJ Ramone, world famous Ramones, right here. You're watching CJ Says, a Ramones podcast. 1, 2, 3, 4. We are going to hit album 5 today. End of the Century, a very important record in the Ramones' career. My brother in arms, Mr. Matt Stocks, will be helping me take this record apart and examine it to the minuscule details as we know them. Matt, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing really well. And hopefully, dude, in the process of this discussion, set the record straight somewhat as well, because not only is this an important album in the Ramones back catalogue, but it's also a divisive one, isn't it? And a somewhat controversial album as well that split the fans over the years. I'm really intrigued to hear your first initial response to the album when it first came out. But before we hear that, let's just contextualize the record and share some info like we like to do at the start. So, End of the Century by Ramones, released February 4, 1980 on Sire Records, recorded at multiple locations, this one, around LA. So their first West Coast album. Also produced, as everybody knows, by Phil Spector, recording producer and murder legend. And I think we'll do a whole separate deep dive on him and the lore surrounding this album when we get to side B on Patreon. But yeah, 3 singles on this album: Rock and Roll High School, Baby I Love You, and Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio. Just like Road to Ruin, 12 songs, 6 on each side. Still a fairly lean, mean album, 34 minutes in, length. But the same cannot be said of the budget. Dude, the budget for this album, $200,000. Making it easily the most expensive Ramones album, and that did, at the time, convert into commercial performance as well, because End of the Century was the highest charting album in the Ramones back catalogue in both the US and the UK, 44 on the Billboard charts and 14 in the UK album chart. However, still not certified gold, important to point that out. So where do we even begin? Let's start with you. You're a young kid. It's 1980. Anticipation on the street for this Phil Spector produced record. Do you remember the first time you laid ears on this record, and what was your and also the wider Ramones fan base reception to this album at the time, dude?
So the first track that I heard was Rock and Roll High School. That's the first one. The reception, as you mentioned, was definitely there were 2 camps when this record came out. There were there were the people that were holding on to that real high energy, what had been termed punk Ramone style. But even amongst those people, you still had the ones that loved some of the real poppy stuff from the Ramones. Those people tended to be more accepting of the record. Those people saw it as kind of a natural progression almost in the road that the Ramones started to travel from the beginning.
Yeah, because those signs were there from the start, as we pointed out, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. But then there were the people who just did not want to hear a pop album from the Ramones. They wanted to hear that original sound that the first 4 albums carried, which was fast and played with intensity, and every song, with a chanting chorus and crazy lyrics, and those two camps. This record definitely drove a wedge between them. But to me, this album definitely is the album that brings Ramones to the mainstream. It's definitely an easier sell to to the regular pop music fans out there.
And radio stations, right?
And radio stations especially, absolutely. Because realistically, radio stations at that point didn't necessarily want, the cool underground stuff. They wanted the stuff that most of their fan base would like. They have to play the music their fan base wants to hear. But there were, guys like Rodney on the Rock out in California, and a couple DJs in New York and radio stations in New York who were playing punk and underground stuff. But this record was, Baby I Love You, and Rock and Roll Radio, and these are, are absolutely mainstream pop hits without a doubt. I felt like with this record, my personal opinion is there wasn't enough Ramones on it. It was obviously a Phil Spector project, and when you work with Phil Spector, that's what you're going to get. You know what I mean? Phil Spector's not a producer who comes in and tries to, make you sound the most like you sounded before he worked with you. He's going to give it the Phil Spector treatment, and this record was the first record where the Ramones strayed very far from everything they had done up to that point.
And super important to point out, no involvement whatsoever from Tommy Ramone. This is the first album where he is entirely absent from all stages of the recording process, and that obviously made an impact.
Yeah, because like I've said throughout this series, Tommy was the guy with the vision. He really was the guy with the vision. But the Ramones were on a collision course with mainstream, with taking a stab at mainstream on mainstream's terms, not on the Ramones' terms. And that's where this album changes it up. This is the Ramones on mainstream radio's terms. Everything from the production to the sequencing to the songwriting, it's all completely different. And I always felt like there are moments of greatness on this record that would fit on any other record that came before the Ramones. But this is the first album where I didn't feel like song for song, side for side, every song was great. This is the first album where I felt like there was a little bit of filler on it. But that being said, Baby I Love You is probably one of the best songs they ever recorded.
Whoa, okay. All right.
As a cover song, it's one of my favorite cover songs of all time by any band.
I was not expecting that, and I'm very pleasantly surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
And well, that obviously, without getting too far ahead of ourselves, that's the first song on side B.
Yeah.
Which we will save for when we flip the record on Patreon and get into side B. And I definitely want to pick your brain about all of the facts and fiction and which falls into which category in regards to the antics of Phil Spector and whether or not guns and hostage situations and all this was the reality and truth of the situation that they were in. So let's, without being too much of a tease, let's definitely save all that good stuff for the side B deep dive on Patreon. But I'm really pleasantly surprised to hear that you do carry a special place in your heart for that Ronettes cover.
Absolutely.
So kicking it off with side A, track 1, Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio, right? This, for me, is one of the greatest album openers ever by any band, because it is different to what the Ramones have done up until that point. But what it is a open love letter to 50s rock and roll. And that's why the brass is in there, is because when you think back to Little Richard and early rock and roll, it had brass. And somewhere along the way, the saxophones and the trumpets and all that stuff were taken out of rock and roll. But this is the Ramones saying, no, we are here to pay tribute to the music that gave birth to us and all these other bands that perhaps you've forgotten about along the way, and all the name checking in the lyrics from Jerry Lee. Like, I just adore this as an album opener and a statement of intent, and especially like it's the it's the end of the 70s, end of the
Yeah.
century. It's almost like a celebratory dystopian apocalyptic commentary, maybe not in a typical kind of hardcore underground way, but they're still tapping into this idea of like, yeah, the punk kind of flipping of art and culture and starting again in such a joyful, upbeat, triumphant way. When you first dropped the needle on the album and you first heard this song, and the brass does come in, what was your initial response?
It really made sense to me. Like this song, as far besides Blitzkrieg Bop, I think this is the next greatest opening song on any Ramones record. And
Agreed.
And we've discussed sequencing and all that stuff, but this song really it brought together so many elements of what made the Ramones great from the beginning, and was an obvious homage to the roots of rock and roll. But what it reminded me of more than the roots of rock and roll was the DJs throughout the years who had like introduced America to what was essentially early on black music. Just
Murray the
introduced.
K and Alan Freed, they're name checking all of those disc jockey legends, aren't they? Yeah.
And that is that becomes anyway a very very that song gives birth to a whole bunch of other songs celebrating radio, everything from Elvis Costello, to even the Buggles with "Video Killed the Radio Star," and like all it suddenly makes it like a thing to celebrate DJs, all over again, because it had been done in the past. But the Ramones really make that a part of the music landscape, is celebrating these guys who brought rock and roll to the youth of America. And that is, to me, just such a Ramones thing to do. You know what I mean? Like a truly Ramones thing to do. And of course, everybody knows how much everybody in the band, Johnny, Joey, Marky, and Dee Dee, really loved the early 50s and 60s music. And that's been documented multiple times over and over. But in this song, they make it very clear where the Ramones have come from, and the people responsible for influencing them to do what they do. And that's what I really loved about the song. It's almost like an anthem to rock and roll culture. And
and it puts them in direct opposition in some ways to bands like The Clash, who are singing no Elvis, Beatles, or the Rolling Stones. Ramones are like, no, Jerry Lee, John Lennon, T-Rex, like they're tracing and celebrating the lineage and saying we're a part of it and we're here to carry it forward into the new decade, or in their eyes, century. Yeah.
And you point out something really important. And I've said this before, the Ramones themselves were punks. They dressed like street toughs. But punk in the way that it used to be intended when, for juvenile delinquents.
Yeah,
if you were juvenile delinquent, that kid's a punk, you know what I mean? Of course, it goes on to mean other things. But I never considered the Ramones, I never really considered them part of the punk rock scene, because punk rock, once the British scene kicked off, punk rock, the term punk meant something very different. It meant a whole new thing. And the Ramones really never subscribed to a lot of the stuff that the what people consider the punk rock scene. They never really subscribed to a lot of that stuff. They were always a standalone band. That being said, uh, this song, besides all the things that we've talked about here, also um, makes it clear from jump what this record is about. This record it's a 100% unabashed uh uh
Homage.
yeah. Well, no, I mean that this record really from jump, they're saying we want to be a pop band. We want to be a mainstream band. This is what we want to do. We want it to be fun and crazy and all the other stuff too. But we the Ramones always thought they were going to be a mainstream band. They always thought they were going to be a mainstream band. And this record was their all out attempt to do that. I said that on the last deep dive we did for Road to Ruin. I said that was the record that broke the Ramones, that really broke, kind of didn't break their spirit, but they felt like they had done everything they could within their style of music to get commercial success. This record, they stopped trusting themselves and they handed over to the record company on this record. That's how I saw it. Like they were like, look, we did it our way for the first 4 records. We the songwriting, everything, Tommy's whole vision and the production and everything else, and it hasn't worked. We're gonna have to trust the record company and go with a legendary producer, Phil Spector.
But I think what's also really important to point out is that they clearly loved all the bands that Phil Spector produced.
Oh, absolutely.
Certainly Joey. And so on paper, although he hadn't done anything in a while and he was notoriously eccentric and insane, he'd been wanting to work with them since Rocket to Russia, right? So he was a fan of them. It wasn't like a mismarriage. On paper, it actually made kind of like quite a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think, I think there's some songs on the record like this one.
Yeah.
Where absolutely he made the song shine. This one and Baby I Love You in particular, those 2 songs, I know we're not on side B yet. But those 2 songs in particular, given the Phil Spector treatment, nobody could have done with those songs what he did with them. Like he really made them into something very special. You know what I mean? But with some of the other songs, I just don't think he understood the direction. I think he was not as in tune with the crazier side of the Ramones and the more wilder side. Stuff like High Risk Insurance and you know what I mean? Like there's some songs on the record where I feel like it was just like, okay, give it a good mix, give it a little polish next. I think he really keyed on the songs that he really liked on the record, and everything else didn't get the same attention or treatment.
So with that in mind, segueing to track 2, I'm Affected. Do you think this is case in point that
Yes.
he missed? Yeah. Right, okay.
Because this is a great song. I love this song. I'm Affected. And Joey's delivery on it. Yeah.
So
Joey's delivery is so good. And Joey wrote the song on top of it, but it's a song that, had it been given the Tommy Ramone, Ed Stasium, or Tony Bon Jovi treatment, this song on any other record would have been a standout song, but on End of the Century, it's and they put it in the second position too, and I think it just wasn't given it needed that other treatment, that it needed that original style. In my opinion, on this record, I wish they would have gotten I think if they had gotten Phil Spector to do the singles, giving him
Yeah,
the
that could have been
singles.
a really good compromise. Yeah.
And then had Ed and Tommy or Tony Bon Jovi and Tommy, well, it would have been Ed and Tommy, and given them the record and let him do the singles, I think it would have been a real winning combination. And I'm sure Phil Spector would have been happy to do it that way. You know what I mean? Because he's kind of out of his comfort zone when he gets affected dropped in his lap. You know what I mean? Like he's just out of his. He's never mixed anything like that before. You know what I mean? He's never worked with anything like that before. He's a producer with a very specific style. But he needs to start with a song that is in his wheelhouse. You know what I mean? Stylistically in his wheelhouse.
How do you think his methods would have sat with, say, Johnny, who, as Slim Jim pointed out, was very much a get in, get the job done, get out kind of guy, which, as we've alluded to in the previous deep dives, that was kind of the working process for the first few records, was like wham bam, thank you ma'am. Obviously Phil Spector notorious for hundreds of takes in some cases. How do you think, or do you know, Johnny would have reacted to that approach to record making? Do you think it would have driven him nuts?
Everything that you just said is 100% true. Johnny was a no bullshit guy when it came to being in the studio. You know, we were always, when I was in the band and before I was in the band, and this is as told to me by Johnny, the band always rehearsed intensely before they went into the studio to minimize the amount of time they actually have to be in the studio. So, so the rehearsals and pre-production work and all of that was done to an intense level, like really intense level. Phil Spector is not that kind of producer. He's not a, oh yeah, come in and just lay down the track and then you can go home and I'll work my magic. He would, you know, he was a taskmaster in the studio, but that's a tried and true method that has worked for, you know, since time immemorial as far as recording goes, that if you torture a musician in the studio, you're going to get more emotion out of them and it's going to come out in their playing. And that's a lot of great producers do that. And they don't always torture you in ways that are overt. Sometimes they make you just sit around and wait a lot, so that you're building up this anxiety and this frustration and when am I going to get to it and blah, blah, and you get into it, get in there and you're so mad and you start messing it up and you get more frustrated. And then finally, after you've played a part, 32 times, they go, okay, we got it. We got that part. Okay, you can, we'll call you back in when we need you again. So, and then there's guys like Phil Spector who, everybody knows the story, pulled a gun on Johnny in the studio.
Well, you can confirm or deny that when we get to side B. Just leave that breadcrumb trail and incentive for everybody to join us on Patreon if they're not already.
Oh, yeah, for the full story.
And I definitely want to talk to you about where Dee Dee was at psychologically and creatively at this point in their recording career as well, because what's, I think, interesting to note is, let me just double check here, at least, the first 3 songs are all Joey. And so he's really dominating. And I think that's true across both sides on this album, is Joey is kind of seemingly the most at home in this period of the band with Phil Spector, with the songwriting. Is that true? Was Joey kind of the main creative force behind this album?
So, I talked before about how, this album would be great if Tommy Ramone, Ed Stasium had done it and Phil Spector do the other, but the other way this could have been an unbelievably great album is if they would have just put Joey in the studio and had Joey do a solo record. I think Joey and Phil Spector working together on a record probably would have produced more stuff like the next song I'm going to talk about, Danny Says. You know what I mean? Like
my favorite Ramones song ever.
One of my
favorites.
Number one. Yeah. It's literally one of my favorites. But I think that really would have been the move for the for the band at that point. I think if maybe Joey would have said, "Hey, I'm going to do a solo record," or something to that effect.
Would have been a very cool time to do it as well.
Yes.
4 near flawless kick-ass records in the can. He goes off, does a Phil Spector solo record, then they reconvene off the strength of the back of that, and that's what takes it to the top. But hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it?
That would have completely gone against the culture of the band and the understanding that the band had with each other too. As time goes on, you see there's more and more songs written by Ramones, it was very much we're all in this together. We're Ramones. We're all in this together. And that's how it was all the way up till the end, between Johnny and Joey. It was always, it's us, I'll tell a real quick story here. The connection between them, Johnny and Joey, was so mutually intense that when Joey passed away, the day that Joey passed away, Johnny was the first person to call me, and he said to me, "Well, there won't be any Ramones reunion now." Like, Johnny understood that without Joey, there was no Ramones. He fully understood that. So with all the stuff that you hear about, Johnny and Joey not getting along and the infighting and blah, 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 and this and that, there was a certain amount of understanding that one was lesser without the other as far as the band went. There was no Ramones without Joey. There was no Ramones without Johnny. Everybody had been replaced. Everybody else had been replaced. But, and that's why Joey doing a solo album at that point wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have happened. But I think, like I said, reimagining the album, reimagining the possibilities, I think that Phil Spector and Joey Ramone would have made a record that probably would have been better than Phil working with the band as a whole.
If we'd have lived in another timeline, what could have been? That's really cool to think about. So let's dive in on track 3 on End of the Century. Danny says, I listened to the demo version of this earlier today, and it's so interesting, like the difference between that and the finished studio version is all Phil Spector, right? All of that flourish and polish and arrangement. And the fact that this wasn't a single is beyond me, because it is so, I put it honestly in the same camp as songs like Waterloo Sunset and God Only Knows by the Kinks and the Beach Boys, as a retro pop masterpiece. And the lyrics are obviously so personal to their lives at that time. You can share all the Easter eggs that are in the song with us. CJ's just pouring himself a fresh pint of Guinness for this one, ladies and gentlemen, because Danny says warrants a toast. It is such an incredible song. It's easily my favorite ever Ramones song. As I said, I put it in the top tier of pop of the 20th century, and I just don't think anybody else could have quite gotten what Phil Spector did in terms of the end product out of this song. It's a masterpiece.
Agreed. 100% agreed. And I think...
Cheers, brother. To Danny Says.
Yeah. I got to wait a little while. The Cascade has not...
Well, yeah, you can't rush art. You can't rush art.
But this song is one of the songs... Everything's been said about Joey that can be said. Everyone, talks about, what a great singer he was and a great frontman and everything else. But Joey Ramone could make you feel something. He could make you feel something. And I'm not talking about, the heavier songs from the Ramones and Blitzkrieg Bop. That's all pure energy just coming out. But Joey could really make you feel something And Danny Says, it's one of the best examples of him singing his heart out, and you feel every word that he sings in that song. And the whole, story about being on the road, and like the
record stores and interviews.
Oh
and
God! But even sound checks at 5:02. Why 5:02? Why not 5:05? You know what I mean? Like, even little things like that. It's really is just beautiful poetry. You know what I mean? And not poetry from some well studied.
Not Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's poetry for us. Like, I could understand what he was singing about, and hearing this song, it gave me like a visual understanding of what the road was like. You know what I mean? Like, he's like opening a door and being like, look, this, have a look inside our world. This is what happens to us every day,
And not just the touring side and the live performance side, but the publicity and the hustle that goes around the business. It taps into that. So I think the absolute singular line that distills the bittersweet, conflicted, dreamer versus reality dichotomy is the "it ain't Christmas if there ain't no snow" line.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Breaks your heart.
Yep. But that's the beauty of that song. Everybody identifies with a different part of it. It's so funny because the line that hit me the most was it was Rick Stores and interviews. Oh, but I can't wait to be with you tomorrow. Like, all this craziness going on, and all you can think about is, I just want to get to see my girlfriend. Tomorrow I get to see my girl. And I'm a sucker for a sappy song, like a total sucker for a sappy song. But that line, when I was young, and because by 1980 I'm already, and I'm dreaming of being on the road, and like, I can't wait to get out there. So that song just encompassed so much. It literally, it's like the playbook for being on the road. Like, later on, I started to recognize I was living parts of that song. Like, all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, yeah. Like, it made me listen to the song differently once I was out on the road and touring, because I could relate to all of it. But not only that, I was doing it with the guy that wrote the song. which is even more bizarre, you know what I mean? But that song really, to me, it's like one of the most beautiful examples of Joey making you feel what he's feeling. And that's a very unique talent. There's a lot of guys out there who write great lyrics that that make you pump your fist or make you get excited and stuff, but it's really only in the pop world and amongst pop fans where you listen to a song that really emotionally drags you into it. Country music too. Country music is the king of that. But Joey could do that. He could make you feel exactly what he was feeling. And as always in Joey's songs, there's always a little bit of melancholy to it.
How it wasn't a single is staggering, though, because when you think about the metal bands, right, that would come in the wake of this song, 1980, obviously a huge year for bands like Judas Priest with British Steel. A lot of that stuff's coming through, and the metal bands are going more pop as well. And you think about Ozzy Osbourne, Mama, I'm Coming Home, or Motley Crue, Home, Sweet Home. Both those songs are in the exact same wheelhouse as this, and both of those songs are monster hits. But because this wasn't put out as a single, it never became the hit that it is. I mean, did you ever ask the guys why it wasn't released as a single?
No.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think the problem with this time period with the band was they were really struggling internally because things were not happening as they had hoped. And I think there was a lot of inner turmoil. This is a time period also where drugs and alcohol were really having an effect on the internals of the band. This is one of those time periods where, you know, it was really rough internally with the band. I think that they probably so it's
So they
kind
were
of
directionless, were they? They just didn't have the focus and the clarity and the united front.
you know, this happens, and I've seen it happen in bands, and it happened to me with my band when I was doing my solo thing. Is when a band builds up a certain amount of momentum, and you start making the next rung on the ladder, and you get to a certain point where that momentum stalls, and you realize things are not going to happen the way that you expected them to happen or that you wanted them to happen. A lot of times bands turn on each other.
Well, they're looking for someone to blame, aren't they? They're all
Yeah.
looking for a reason why they're not massive.
Yeah. And it's a really difficult situation because, one, it kills your confidence. It's a real confidence killer, which is anathema to a band. Like, if a band loses its confidence, that's a bad thing. But that's from what I talked about with Joey and Johnny and even Dee Dee a little bit about that record. That's kind of where they were at. Joey was very excited because they were working with Phil Spector, and he was like, "Oh, this is it. This is going to be it. You know, we're going to make a great record." But everybody else in the band was kind of like, "Yeah, because they had given up control. Like, literally, they had given up control." And Joey was very much kind of in the driver's seat on this record. You know, this was the record that Joey wanted to make. The rest of the band, not so much. You know, the rest of the band wanted to continue doing what they were doing, but they had given it 4 records, and they had to kind of surrender to the record company and let the record company have its way and let Joey work with the producer that he wanted to work with. And it was a very, very hard time period for the band. But I've personally seen that happen, and it's sad. It's just sad because there are no good outcomes, you know what I mean? Unless something major happens, you can pretty much count that as the beginning of the decline. You've reached your apex, and now it's a decline, you know. The Ramones, to their credit, were tough enough to hang in there and stay there for many albums after it, but most bands don't make it. Once they lose the momentum and they start sliding backwards, most bands will, you know, they turn on each other and, if we had done this and you shouldn't have done that, blah, blah, and this and that. And, you know, they go by the wayside. But this record was a tough time period for the band. It really was.
Well, if they were a lesser band, it probably would have ended their career. But
yes,
the Ramones are not your average band, and they had the tenacity to beyond see it out because, you know, several more albums and several more monster hits were still up their sleeve as well. But for me, it doesn't really get better than Danny says. That for me is the creative peak, just for my personal taste and my specific fond spot in everything that the Ramones do. I think Danny says for me is just like, it's hard to beat that.
Agreed.
So track 4. This is
before we jump,
please.
I got to say, Phil Spector knocked it out of the park on this one.
He really did.
That opening, that whole opening part
makes
so beautiful. It's like so beautiful, and the way that Joey comes in singing on it, it's such a perfect piece of pop music. I mean, really a perfect, and that's, that's Phil Spector's. That's his territory. That's where nobody can out Phil Spector on that type of music, and he really kills it on that. He really does.
Yeah, all people need to do is listen to the demo, as I did today, and then listen to the finished version, and it's like night and day. So as we get to track 4, this is a song that's 5 years old at this point. It was written in 1975 by Dee Dee and Richard Hell, right? Was it a co-write between those two?
Yeah, there was always a little bit of back and forth on that. I think Johnny Thunders may have even laid claim to it at one point or something, but it was yeah, it was a song that had been around for a while.
And been out for a while, because obviously Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers recorded it and released it already on their LAMF record called Chinese Rocks on their album Chinese Rock here. But what I think is very interesting about this song appearing on this album is Dee Dee does not seem to be as creative at this point as he was with Road to Ruin. As we discussed with the deep dive with Road to Ruin, he's going off in country territory and he's just really experimenting and progressing as a songwriter. By the time it gets to this album, there's a notable lack of original, as in brand new, Dee Dee compositions. Now, was that drugs? Was a lot of that he was just in his own maelstrom of madness at this point, and it was deterring his songwriting capabilities?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, but everybody in the band was having their struggles at this point, except Johnny. Johnny was the only one who was, pretty much stable throughout the Ramones career. But everybody, Joey and Mark too, they had their struggles, and this record was really. I'm not
at liberty to say certain things.
Yeah, well, because there were things I always suspected about this record, like things that, some of the stuff does not sound like it's the band playing on it, in my opinion. There's some stuff, I'm just like, that don't, stylistically it don't sound like the band, and well, I know
Baby I Love You is clearly an example of that, right?
Yeah,
were any of the band even in there?
that's and realistically, I think it was Ed Stasium. I had brought this up in an interview, and I think it was Ed Stasium, who we'll be having on at some point, was like, I don't know why CJ would say that, but I mean, listening to the record, it doesn't sound like the Ramones. And that could be, because it was produced differently. The bass sound is different. The drum sound is different. Phil Spector brings his style to it. You know what I mean? But there is some stuff on the record that I would have to be told by somebody who was in the room that it was, Dee Dee on bass or Mark on drums or Johnny on guitar. Because there's some stuff on there when you listen to it, it ain't them. It's definitely not them. And there were things, bass lines and stuff, that I always thought, like, Dee Dee didn't write that. That's not a Dee Dee bass line, you know what I mean? That's obviously somebody, and could be somebody else played it even, you know what I mean? And that's not to say that Dee Dee wasn't a great bass player or anything. It's just stylistically, it didn't sound like him. So even if he was playing it, he probably didn't write it, you know what I mean? But this record, there are a lot of questions in there for me, because even some of the drum stuff, I played with Mark. I know Mark's style. I know how Mark hits, you know what I mean? Like, I know what Mark smells like when he plays, you know what I mean? Like, that's how tight me and Mark were on stage. But there's some stuff on the record where I'm like, wow, that's really odd. Now, it could be Phil Spector's direction. He could have been saying, hey, I want you to play this in this part of the song, something totally alien to Mark. But looking at the time period, understanding what was going on, and just by the sound of some of this stuff, I always was of the opinion that it's probably not a whole lot of the band actually on the record.
I think that's why it's such an interesting, divisive, and controversial album. Is it's so steeped in lore and
Yes.
mystery and what really happened, who really played what, and ultimately, I think a lot of that truth is just buried, isn't it? And it's just like you just have to try and interpret it as best you can with the information that you have. And obviously, I think talking. So, was Ed involved as a musical director? Was he sort of on board, even though he wasn't recording? He was there, right, or around at least.
Yes, that
Yeah.
was the one bow to the last couple of records, to the band's original vision of what they wanted to sound like, was to have Ed on board.
So he's the man to ask, isn't he? When we get him
Yes.
on.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Ed's probably one of the most knowledgeable people about the Ramones. He was involved with them for, from the original lineup, all the way up to Mondo Bizarro.
Amazing.
Like he was
That'll
in
be
there.
about 4 episodes then, won't it, when we get him on? We'll have to split that up into about 5 hours worth of content.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this, dude. Which is the superior version of Chinese rocks or rock, in your opinion? Do you like the Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers version or the Ramones version more?
I like the Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers version because that's the one I heard first. But the Ramones, the Ramones turn it into a really good song. The Johnny Thunders version is just a cool, trashy, and he was a junkie. So hearing him sing it is, it's different than hearing Joey sing it,
I like the little lyric change they do as well, right? Because Johnny says DD and Joey says Artie for Arturo.
Yep.
Great tune though, isn't it? Great iconic piece of street rock and roll. Like it's up there with 53rd and 3rd as one of those legendary DD compositions. But that's, I think, why it's so interesting that it's on this album, but it's 5 years old, and he's not at this point producing anything that's like on par with that, at least for this album.
Yeah.
The
that song though, live, if you ever saw the Ramones live, I think we played it in every set. The Ramones live version is absolutely the superior version. It just sounds so good done live. Like there's something about the way that Johnny plays it. The Johnny Thunders version is so like laid back and slightly out of tune and like just like that real junky style. But the way that Johnny plays it, like in his style, it just gives it a whole different feel, and I definitely prefer the Ramones version.
I prefer the Ramones recorded version as well, actually. I just think it's a beefier, punchier rock and roll song. So we got 2 songs left on side A, both, I think, like great. So I would say as we approach the second half of side A, for me, personally, every song on side A is killer, personally. Track 5 is The Return of Jackie and Judy, which I love because they're mining and mythologizing their own back catalogue, their own material, their own characters and previous songs. Love the riff on this, but again, this guitar riff sounds very different to all of the other Ramones songs, doesn't it? Totally different style of playing.
Yeah. This song in general,
drums as well. Different.
Yeah, this song in general, and I think it has a lot to do with the production on it too. The production on it is kind of weird. I think if it was done like an original Ramones style production, it would have been a bit more of a powerful song. It's but I think it loses something being produced the way it was. Whereas Danny Says, Rock and Roll Radio, his style production really benefits those songs. On this one, I think it doesn't work as well, and the song loses some of the power that it would have had recorded, by Ed and Tommy and run through their production methods. But um, it's a good song. It's not one of my favorites on the record. It's a good song. I tend to feel the opposite way of you do. I felt like it was kind of cheap.
Right, yeah. Now that
To
makes sense.
like
Yeah.
leaning on a song that was already a hit to create another one. But I never liked, back in the 50s they used to do that a lot. Like an artist would record a song,
The twist. Let's twist again.
Yeah,
How
you know
many
what I
more
mean?
times can we twist?
Yeah, I never dug that.
Although
I never liked
The
that.
twist and twist again are both absolute bangers. But yeah, it's that idea of recycling the same
Yes.
concept
Yeah.
to lesser returns.
Yes. Yeah. I know I didn't really dig that aspect of it, but the song in general I think is a good song, a strong song, but it would have been better produced in the original method. And I hate to keep saying that, like going backwards, but as I said earlier, my view always was it would have been great to have Phil Spector do the singles and Tommy and Ed do the rest of the record.
Maybe they could do a remastered version. Ed could get his hands in there and get the files and give it a go.
I believe that's in the works.
Well, it is a big year for Ramones, isn't it? 50 years. So you would hope as a fan that there's a few treats and surprises on the horizon. This podcast obviously being a part of that, just reclaiming of their legacy and trying to give them the credit that they've long been overdue.
Yes. Yeah. There's so much in the Ramones catalog, so many other records that I would love to hear Ed get into the studio with and just kind of have a little redo on them, because there were so many moments of greatness over the next 7-8 albums. Where the songwriting was really good, but the production just wasn't there. And, that was always my opinion. The records usually suffered more from production than they did songwriting, but, when we have Ed on, we'll talk to him about that.
Speaking of guests as well, some people might be already aware of this new Ramones tribute band called The Return of Jackie and Judy, which features Fred Armisen, a couple of the girls from Sleater Kinney, and we are talking about trying to get that whole band on the show as guests. So watch this space, and we can ask them, of all the names to choose from, why this one? Interesting. Obviously, those two girls in the band kind of make sense on that front, but
yep.
So let's close out Side A, dude, with Let's Go. Dee Dee and Johnny co-write.
Yeah.
I just think this is a great kind of, standard but hard-hitting rock and roll banger to end Side A. I like the way it ends with like explosions and bomb sounds going off at the end. It's not anything like completely stunning, but I do think it's like solid Ramones by numbers, and it does bring the album to a Side A to a close in a nice kind of punchy way, doesn't it?
I think it's definitely got a filler feel to it, but I think that it's a good way to end that first side. There, any other spot on the record, it would probably not be a very memorable song, but they ended on Side A. They add that little tag on the end. It kind of sets up the B side. So again, this goes to sequencing and what goes where and why it goes there and how it should go there and all those nice things. Not the strongest Ramon song, but it makes a good ending for Side A on this record.
I actually think, I'm just imagining this now, if we look at the 6 songs on Side A, just as a fun little exercise, I would have maybe gone, Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio to begin, obviously. Then 2, you go straight into Let's Go. Bombs go off. Then it goes into Danny Says. Then Chinese Rock. Then I'm Affected. And then you end Side A with The Return of Jackie and Judy.
I get where you're going with that. I see why you had them lined up that way. That's good. That's good. You're thinking in the right direction there. That's
storytelling, isn't it?
I really like the conversation that we had on sequencing, and we've brought it up oftentimes, but it really is an important thing, and as you just pointed out, like sometimes you actually you start to develop your own preference for sequencing. You know what I mean? Oh, that song would have been great in that spot. So it's good. You're thinking in the right direction.
I love it. Well, thanks to this podcast, and thanks to rethinking about these records in this new and very kind of magnified, expectional way. So we're going to close out this deep dive session with our favorite picks from side A. As we like to do, I'll pick one, but I'll let you go first. First dibs to the main man, as always. I sort of know where you're going, and I'm kind of a little bit sad that I won't have the chance to pick the same song, but I do have a reserve in place in the instance that you do decide to go with Danny Says as your selection for side A. So which is going to be your pick for side A of End of the Century, CJ?
Do you remember Rock and Roll Radio? I love Danny Says.
That was my second pick. So great. You go Rock and Roll. I'll go Danny Says. Perfect. They're the top two, aren't they? Easily.
I love Danny Says. To me, it's one of the great Ramones ballads that is just, as I expressed earlier, it's definitely one of my favorites. But do you remember Rock and Roll Radio is as you pointed out, is a statement. That is the band making a statement with, it's unequivocal. They are telling everybody where they come from, who brought them here, and how it happened. And that's what I love about the song. If it's one of the songs that was a standard in every set. And probably a really big fan favorite on top of it.
Dude, I just love the rock and roll radio. Let's go.
SATURDAY night. It's literally the Bay City Rollers, but they're paying homage. That's exactly what they're doing. They're paying homage to all the stuff that came before them that they loved.
Well, those two songs are easily the top two on side A, aren't they? Rock and Roll Radio and Danny Says. They're just flawless, unbeatable, untoppable. So there we go. There's our two selections. Please, as always, make a note of your favorite side A tune on End of the Century, everybody listening or watching. And join us as we flip the record and head over to Patreon for side B. And again, without being a tease, I'm going to try and draw as much lore and anecdotal gold out of CJ Ramone during that session as I can, because the stories surrounding it are just so funny, and there has to be some truth, because there can't be smoke without fire, can there, CJ?
That's correct.
Sound checks at 5:02, record stores and interviews. Oh, but I can't wait to be with you tomorrow.
All right, guys, that was side A of our deep dive series. If you're interested in hearing Matt and I's review on side B, head over to patreon.com/CJ Says. We hope to see you guys on the next one.